Hi, everyone. It is about 7:59, so I thought I'd arrive a little early. Today, it's kind of interesting because my background screens have disappeared out of my Zoom account, so who knows, but oh well. So I just blurred my background a little bit. I kind of like the way it kind of makes me pop when you have the little blur in the background. So tonight, what I wanted to talk about is the transformational interview. And I think it's really important that we, as podcast guests and podcast hosts, that we really think about the questions we ask and the questions we answer, because there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of noise out there in podcast land, but podcasting and video podcasting, like the Be Connected Broadcast Network, is designed to help you grow your authority, to grow your expert status, to grow your celebrity, to help make a bigger impact and have more influence. And of course, the big thing is more income, because if you're just spinning your wheels, just talk, and you're never listening to what your audience wants or requires, what will happen is, number one, nobody will listen to your show. You'll just become one of those people who has burned out because it's not very satisfying if you don't get any feedback or any results from podcast interviews. So it is 8:01. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And if you have been following along, you may have requested the 30 questions to spark a thought-provoking influencer interview from me. And I've given away quite a few of those recently. And I thought what I would do tonight, and again, we're not going to stay very long for the lesson, for the podcast club, but I really think it's important that you understand that if you're a podcast host or a podcast guest, if you really want to have more impact, more influence, and of course, more income in the future, you need to really understand first, who is your audience? Why are they showing up to listen to you? What value do you bring to them? And it isn't just about edutainment as much as it is having these real conversations with real people, but providing superior value to the people who are listening, your audience, who can become your clients and your customers. Most people who do podcasts, if they're just doing it because they just want to talk, they're not thinking about satisfying the audience. They're really thinking about their own ego. And so I want you to think about this. Why, number one, why do you want to be a podcast guest or a podcast host? And if your answer is because you have something of value to share and your audience can benefit from it, and your host can benefit from you as a guest, and the guest can benefit from you as the host, then of course, the way I see it, it's that wonderful win-win-win that you can achieve when you're doing this. So let's just go over a few of these questions, and then I want to talk a little bit more about structure and the transformational interview. I don't know that a lot of podcast guests have had a lot of formal training, and that is one of the things I do. I actually work with people so that they can hone that message down into sound bites instead of, let's say, 15-minute rambles. I have interviewed people who just will not shut up, and I can't get a word in edgewise. And as a host, it really makes my job really difficult if the guest won't stop talking so that I can make a comment or ask another question, because sometimes that rambling doesn't do you any good. So you want to start thinking in terms of, what are the questions that I need to answer in order to provide a high quality transformational interview? Who is the transformation for? Not you, not the host. It's for your listeners. You want them to listen to your conversation and lean in and kind of tilt their head like, oh my God, I have to know more about this person. I want to do more work with this person. Oh my goodness, this person gets me. We all are seeking that transformation. And that's why we're listening to podcasts, especially educational podcasts or how-to podcasts or learning podcasts. A lot of people in the Be Connected network broadcast system who are members of Be Connected, they're business people. What do they want? They want to have good connections, good referrals, and they want to learn how to network so that it equates to them giving value and, of course, having the full circle: impact, influence, income. Impact, influence, income. It's this authority wheel that is created where you're attracting your ideal clients, you're repelling the people you don't want. And typically podcasts are designed to help you to find your hot or warm market. So think about the marketing aspects of all of this, because the truth is, if you're trying to be a podcast guest or a podcast host, you are a podcast marketer. That is what you're doing. You're using this venue of podcasting or video broadcasting to attract your ideal clients and repel the people you don't want listening to you. So let's just go over a few of these questions. And again, you can get this free. It's my Blue Ocean Authority 30 Questions to Spark a Thought-Provoking Influencer Interview. You can get that free right here. Just click on the information, fill out the form, and it will send it to you free. It will ask you for your email address so that, of course, you can get the PDF. So again, why are we doing this? We're doing this because we have a specific audience and we want them to listen to us so they can get to know, like, and trust us, right? That's a marketing terminology: know, like, trust. And if you have been around for a while, you recognize that. And even if you're brand new, you'll learn very quickly, why are you doing this? You're doing this so that you can attract ideal clients. So here's some basic questions, and I'm going to go over a format so that you can kind of understand how to use this. Now, in the podcast world, there are short interviews and there are longer interviews. The nice thing about a podcast is that you have this opportunity to sometimes talk for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes. Some podcasters will go on for hours. But the average interview, in my experience, to have a nice conversation with someone really is about 40 minutes. But less is often more. And I want to talk about how to do shorter interviews that are more powerful, that will attract people, because the truth is, people don't have a lot of time. However, a lot of people who listen to podcasts, they're in a car, they're driving somewhere. The average commute is like 26 minutes. So think about it. If you have a podcast on demand, they have the newer car, they're driving along, they're listening, And if you can do your podcast in that half an hour time frame or a little more, they will be able to listen to it on their commute to and from work. So that's something to think about. But again, you need to learn how to answer questions in what are called sound bites. So you need to be concise, clear, and you have to have your stories honed in to be like 1 to 2 minutes. Why? Because you might get interviewed on TV. And if that happens, the most that you'll probably ever have on a TV appearance is maybe 5 minutes if you're lucky, but those average about 2 to 3 minutes if you're talking about yourself, like if you're an author. So sound bites, write that down, write yourself a note, is shorten your answers to what would be considered a sound bite. That's also useful because if a newspaper reporter or a magazine writer hears you or can take that, they can use that as quotes in an article because they can pull that off of the audio. So there's a lot of reasons to learn how to speak very clearly and succinctly with your answers. But let's go over the basics. So often you might be asked by the host, tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do. Okay, so what I would do with that question is when you become a guest on my show, I'd say, send me a short bio, like 50 words, and I may or may not use it depending on how I have done my research. I may want to introduce you in a certain way, and that's my prerogative. I don't have to read what you send me. Always know that the host is always in control, but you can, of course, add your information so that the host doesn't have to do as much work. Always respect that when you're a guest on someone's show, they have the power, not you. But if you provide them with questions and a good bio and images for them to use in the production, they're going to elevate your status in their own mind because they said, oh, your experience, you provided me questions, you have your one speaker, one sheet, you have a high quality image. A lot of people make big mistakes around that. And I can go into that in another podcast club program about the little odd mistakes people make when they send images and things like that. But let's stick with our questions. So what would you say is the specialty in your industry? How long have you been in this? How did you get into this industry in the first place? What's your personal story and that of your business? You always want to have personal stories that make sense for the topic. Often I've had this experience, trainers will try to find, the most tragic story that you have and then say, that's your story. No, your stories have to make sense. It doesn't have to be awful stories, turning points like something bad happened to you. It could actually be a positive thing that happened to you that made you realize something. Like I realized that I was an entrepreneur when I sold night crawlers from my house on Main Street in Philomath, Oregon, and how that happened. I have a little story about that. So that's not a bad story. It's a aha moment story. And then I have other stories related to my mother and the fact she was a writer and didn't get published and how that drove me to want to help other people. That one's a little bit sad because, of course, my mom died without ever being published. But you've got to learn when to tell which story. So that's how someone like me can help you, because don't go with, tell the most tragic story you can go, because that may not be the story you want to tell, depending on what the results are that you're trying to get. Remember, you're trying to provide a transformational story so that your audience can relate to you. It's all about the audience. So here's some other questions. What were some of your main challenges? If you have some challenges or myths about what you do, it's always good. You can have 3 things, 5 things. Again, remember, short sound bites. If you can say 3 different things, or the 3 keys to something, the 3 myths about something, you can easily talk about that in as little as 2 to 3 minutes and really give some concrete information. So maybe what are your biggest triumphs? Maybe you have some big triumph. I know Werner Berger is in the Guinness Book of World Records for climbing mountains. He probably has all kinds of fabulous stories that he learned at the top of the mountain or as he climbed the mountain. And then why did he want to do that? I mean, there's all kinds of ways that his stories could go to help other people to feel that even though they're not climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, sometimes just living our lives is like climbing a major mountain. So if he tells the story right, he can attract a lot of people to him, even though they're never going to be climbing mountains. So again, it's about the transformation you provide for the audience, for that one person in the audience who some people might call an avatar. All that means is it's one person who is your ideal client. So another question could be, how would you do things differently if you're given the chance? You know, that 2020 hindsight can always be a good question. How do you see yourself or your business moving forward or progressing? Maybe you have this big vision, or maybe you have a gift. I personally don't go with what's your superpower? I mean, if I had some people ask me that question sometimes in interviews, and I'll be like, I don't know. I mean, I know that when I talk to somebody, I start to get information about them and downloads, and I can see them in the future, like being on the stage, being a speaker, because I know what I can do to help them. You know, I can help them become published in a book. I can help them become an international bestseller. I can help them with their speech. I can help them get camera ready. There's so many things that I can do when I work with someone that it's hard for me to say, well, what's my superpower? You know, I don't really know, because I don't think like that. You always have to formulate your questions in a way so that when you answer them, it makes sense, again, to the audience listening, so that they can put themselves into the place of seeing themselves being able to accomplish something. So they want to call you. They want to listen to more of your interviews. They want to read your blog. They want to go find out more about you. And once they find out more about you, then of course they want more from you. And podcasting from both sides of the mic as a host and a guest can help you achieve that. Here's another question. Some of your latest projects. What are you working on now? What are you focusing on? What are your primary goals for your latest project? What are your biggest challenges? So again, these are just individual questions. And what I would say to you is, when you're looking at these individual questions, you want to formulate stories or answers around them that make sense for you. There is no formula other than talk about yourself in a way that will help people to visualize themselves being successful doing what you're doing. And of course, they see you as the guide. You are the mentor, you are the coach, you are the person who has the answer to their problems. And what makes you so special as the host or the guest is, hey, I lived it, I experienced it, I solved this problem, I can help you solve it too. What do people want? They want freedom, freedom of time, the freedom that money brings, the freedom of choice. Freedom is one of those words that means something a little bit different to each person. But what it all boils down to is people want to feel that you are the one that can help them. And again, it's all about that transformational journey that you're trying to get or give during this interview. And again, remember, this could be a minute, this could be a 2-minute interview, this could be a 15-minute interview, a half an hour, it could be a 6-minute webinar, it could be something very, very short. So it's your responsibility to get everything honed down. And the reason why I provided all these questions is so that you could get an idea of how you could put together, say, 10 questions and give that to an interviewer, and you would have an awesome interview. So here's some more questions. What are some issues or lessons that you've come across that you weren't prepared for? So there you're like, well, gee, this happened to me. I wasn't prepared for it, but this is how I handled it. Where do you see this project going in the future? Do you feel that you've achieved the key goals that you set out for yourself, and why? I ask a real simple question. What is your big mission and your big message? Big message, big mission. I have books, people who told me about their big message and big mission. I have volumes called Women Innovators, Women Who Make a Daily Difference. Leaders, makers, and givers, women who make a daily difference. So it's really important that you think about this and that you start to think about what is the message, what is your transformational message that you want to talk to host A, B, C, or D. And as a host, what are the questions that you can ask your guests that will help them show their expertise, their authority, so that the audience is happy to have spent the time listening to the two of you banter back and forth. So those are really important. And here's some questions for helping to engage others. So again, you're using your own experience. So if I say to you, using your own experience, how would you recommend that others prepare before undergoing X? So if I was interviewing me, I might say, so based on your experience, what do you think is the best thing that a coach might do to really use podcasts successfully? And then I would answer that question. And of course, I would say, come up with some good questions that you want the host to ask you, and then practice with someone back and forth so that you know that everything flows and that you don't go off on tangents. It's really easy to go off on tangents. But again, you do not want to be scripted to the point where you sound like a robot or that you're reading it. Like if I'm reading it, it would be like, what are your 3 favorite tools for running your projects or business more effectively? You can tell that I'm not really engaged. I'm just reading it. So you want to always have answers in mind. And again, your host might ask you a question that isn't on any list. So you always have to be prepared with answers. And sometimes they ask you questions that you're not really prepared for. But this is something, and it's let's say it's a pet peeve of mine when people say, that's a really good question. Okay, all you're doing when you say that's a really good question, especially if you provided the questions, is you're using up time. That's a really good question is a few seconds, and that's time that you could have been using to answer the question. So don't pretend that, if you gave the host a bunch of questions and the questions, don't pretend like you've never heard that question before. You're better off to just answer those questions and have more time of you talking and giving it, again, really clear, focused, succinct, honest, from the heart answers. I think that's really important. And sometimes hosts ask, let's just say, they're not appropriate questions, or they're not questions that will really matter to anyone. It's just that they put it into a formula for their show. And you'll hear them ask every single guest, like, what's your favorite book? Unless it's pertaining to you, I don't really care what your favorite book is. I'd rather hear, again, if you've written a book, how is your book going to help you? What makes you the expert? So that people want to hear you speak and get a concept of, how do you think? How do you process? How do you sound? These are all things that are really important. And I just want you to don't think in terms of scripting or canned information. Think in terms of being prepared and having questions that you have developed and the answers to, so that everything just comes across naturally. And a big secret is be sincere, be interested. Sometimes I'll interview someone and they'll say something and I'll go, wow. And then I'll follow up on that answer because it was unexpected, and you should always be prepared for the unexpected answer and be willing to allow the fact that your host is in control and they're going to ask you different questions. And so again, most interviews are based on who you are, what do you bring to the table, what are some of the challenges that you've faced. And like I said, I've got these 30 questions, and these can really help you to brainstorm what you want to say and do. And again, this is just 30 questions. This is by no means exhaustive. My suggestion to you when you do interview questions that you want someone to ask you is that you brainstorm it. And again, not every interview is going to be about topic X or Y. You may talk about different aspects, like the podcast club. We talk about different aspects of podcasting every week. Like this week, I'm focusing more on the interview questions. Before I was talking last week, I talked more about the audience and how to prepare yourself for the audience. So every podcast episode is just going to be different. So here's some more questions. What is the most valuable piece of advice that somebody gave you? So that's a good question because it helps you to think about people who have been there for you, who've given you advice, and you can throw out their name, and it gives you an opportunity. If you've worked with anyone who has a lot of clout, you can talk about them, or somebody you'd like to honor. I like that question. How have you influenced the work of others? What particular contribution have you made to others' projects? Sometimes we have contributed to other people. They may not even acknowledge it or know it, For example, when I was a newspaper editor, I used to meet with every one of the people that I worked with, and I'd say, well, what do you want to do? Who do you want to become? And most of the time, the reporters would say they wanted to become an editor because, of course, that meant more control. That meant they'd get more money. And so I'd say, okay, I'll help you do that. And then I would help them position, whenever jobs came up to build up to that, or maybe they became my assistant, an assistant editor, and pretty soon they became whatever it was they wanted to be, if they wanted to be an editor. So I think that's really important. So another one, and this is important, always be ready to give a place where people can contact you. In a podcast, remember, if somebody is driving in a car, it's really hard to write down phone numbers. It's probably easier for them to remember a short website address. And again, you don't have to say www. You can just say, they can go to my website, TAMIPatzer.com. And then because Tami is Tami, I would spell it. So it would be like, if you want more information, just go to my website, TAMIPatzer.com. And it's important that you tell them the last three letters because there are .nets, etc. But then if it's something they need to know how to spell, you could say Tami Patzer, TAMIPatzer.com. And then, maybe they know it, or of course, or you could say, you can find me here or there. And then if you have a giveaway, make sure that you have the giveaway in an easy place for people to get it. It could be on your website. Maybe it's in Facebook. Maybe you've provided the link to the podcast show host, which you should always provide your website, any of your social media. Now, if you're in Be Connected, you want to make sure that people have your Be Connected address. You want to invite people to your Be Connected groups and platform so that they can interact with you. So those are just some of the questions. So I wanted to go over that, but then I wanted to, again, talk a little bit more about the framework of what I would consider the perfect podcast interview that you could develop. And of course, think about it again. Normally your host is going to introduce you, give them a short bio. Don't give them something that takes 5 minutes to read, 50 words, 75 words. That about 75 words is going to be almost a minute, depending on how fast people read. So keep it short. So short bio, let's say 50 words. You can say a lot in 50 words. And then, of course, you're going to have the opportunity to talk more about yourself when the host asks you the first question. So typically, you're going to have a little introduction about yourself that is different than the bio. Your bio will probably have, they're the international best-selling XYZ, who, that's a typical bio. Now, this gives you the opportunity to do your own introduction, sans all of that, meaning you don't have to say any of this stuff because it isn't important, and you don't have to say your name because the host has already introduced you. So you want to make your introduction get the attention. What is this all about? Why should they be listening? I don't know if you've ever had an intimate private conversation in a restaurant, but all the people are around you, and all of a sudden you and somebody, you're talking about business or something, and everybody else is leaning in kind of like this, listening, pretending to be looking at their phones when they're really listening to what you're saying because it's interesting. That happens to me a lot. Then you want to, after your introduction, you're going to be doing what they call future pacing, which means that you're going to have the audience feel what it's going to be like to have you solve the problem. And again, it might be just a sentence. And when I work with people, I actually, of course, we go through this whole thing. And then I have some other associates that help also. So you get a lot of opportunity to not only get my input, but other people's input also, so that when you're done, you're like the ultimate podcast host or the ultimate six-figure podcast guest. And then, of course, you have to talk about the problem you solve. And so whatever that problem is, you have to literally make people feel the pain. And a lot of people are empathic. So if you're talking to women, a lot of women, emotional stuff really attracts women. Men seem to like more statistics or numbers, but again, a little mix of it all. And you want to show whatever the problem is, the pain of the problem. Then you can tell your struggle story. You know, you had this problem, you struggled, you were frustrated, you were angry, you didn't know what to do, you know, whatever the issue was. And that way they can go, oh my God, I felt frustrated. I felt angry before. I felt sad, you know, whatever that is. And then, of course, you're going to share the secret that you discovered when you figured out how to get out of your tangled, struggling mess that you found yourself in. And it was like, you know, that aha moment, that secret. And then you're going to promise in your interview that you're going to give them 3 steps, 3 tips, 3 keys to something. And 3 is always a good number. Odd numbers are always good, but typically people can remember 3 things, you know, or, you know, odd numbered things. It's just easier to remember. And it also gives you more time. Remember, we're starting out, we want everything to be very short sound bites, but when you have 3 things, you can expand. Expand on number 1, expand on number 2, expand on number 3. And then after you've got all of this done, this is when you can give them some credibility about you, the credibility story, and why they should listen to you. And I watch a lot of webinars, and I think the biggest mistake that I see in webinars and podcasts is people go, well, why should you listen to me? And then they'll do the formula that they were taught by, you know, the signature story people. Everybody has a different name for it. But again, you never want to come across as if you're doing a formula or a script, because people, after a while, they go, oh, they learned that from, you know, that guru or that guru. So you really want to understand that, again, you're telling the right stories, the right pain points for this particular interview. And be sure that you actually listen to the interview, the podcast that you're going to be on, at least 3 shows, so that you know what the heck to expect when you get on that show with them. Then, of course, you're going to do your solution story. You're going to give them the simple 1, 2, 3 process to solve the problem, and then give some client success stories. So, for example, one of my clients, Alice, when I booked her on TV shows and worked with her to hone down her stories. And we ended up with like 3 or 4 different TV appearance stories. And she ended up on 75 shows in like 3 months all over the country. And that was a result of me helping her get booked. But then, of course, she had to do the hard work. She had to show up and get interviewed and, do a good job of sharing the story. And a big success point for her was that all those TV appearances helped her get a book deal with a well-known doctor and they're co-writing a book now. So that's a client success story, an example. And I'm sure that you have many of those. And I would, have a handful of those in my back pocket, depending on the show you're on. And for some people, it might be better to have examples of women. Maybe it might be good to have a mix. It might be good to have younger people, older people, like who knows? But just short little client success stories. And then you want to have your giveaway, whatever that may be. Like, for example, my giveaway is my 30 questions to ask and answer from both sides of the mic. So that's a giveaway. And what I found is that a lot of people really want that. So be sure to get yours. So I'm laughing at myself just because that is a good example. And then, of course, the call to action is contact me if you want to have a 6-figure podcast discovery call. I always have trouble with names of what should I call my call? And what I suggest for your one-on-one call, if you're going to do a one-on-one call, is call it something related to the result of what they would get. For example, I have the 6-figure podcast guest call consultation. It's all about the language of what the result is. And it's always kind of, when you talk about both sides of the mic, be a host, be a guest. The truth is, I think people should be on both sides of the mic because both of them lend authority and credence to who you are as an expert. And on Be Connected, I have the podcast club. So here I am sharing with you. I also do expert profiles, which is a show where I interview experts about who they are. And if they choose, they can actually become part of the Expert Profiles book. And then coming up, I also have the book tour. And what that is the new show is called Author Interview. And I have connected with several podcasters, and I'm putting together virtual book tours for authors or people who are soon to be forthcoming authors so that they can work with me initially, get ready to go, and then go practice with some podcast people who I personally know. So I know that they're going to be treated with respect, and by the time they're done, they'll be ready to go get booked on bigger and better shows or on television or on national radio. So there's a lot with that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out because I think I talked a little bit longer than I wanted to tonight, but I really wanted you to get the idea of questions and answers for both sides of the mic with podcasting. And I wanted you to really understand the concept of the purpose of being a podcast host or being a podcast guest, and that you want to really put some thought and energy into developing your show, the flow. And then if you're a guest, putting together that speaker one sheet, putting together all the materials that you're going to need, and going from there. So with that, our next podcast club will be I think it's next week, Sunday at the same time. And next week, we will talk about speaker one sheets and how to provide them, and then also the other things that a podcast host will want. And that's going to make you what I would call a podcast superstar. And you definitely want to tune in for that, or if you can't come live, watch the replay. So with that, this is Dr. Reverend Tammy Tatzer, and I hope you enjoyed this educational event